My name is James Prendergast. I'm a lead systems engineer at a large MSO in the Northeast. Here to discuss with you today the things that we've done in building our system and architecting our systems for performance. I want to thank you guys for coming out so early in the morning. It's 9 o'clock on the third day. I'm sure you didn't want to get up so early for this, but I appreciate it. This session was put together for a couple of reasons. The first reason was to discuss what we've done during the design phase to make sure that we have systems that deliver a consistent level of performance to all of our virtual machines. Now, part of the idea behind me putting this session together was to not only be able to present and share with you guys what I've done, but also to work with some of the engineers here at VMware and basically get myself to look into the communities to make sure that everything that I've been doing and that I continue to do is really along the lines of what we should be doing. It's been fantastic, and it's really brought out a lot of good things for me. I'm hoping that it brings a couple of things out for you guys. I'm going to open the floor up to questions at the end. If I found the best way to get the most out of the sessions was really to not only listen to what the speaker says, but also ask questions. I'm going to give you guys any pointers, any tips that I've discovered along the way on what I've done with virtualization. And the second part of what I want to do is share with you some of the things that we do as part of our day-to-day operations to keep the system running healthy. I'm not the only one that runs our systems. We have several teams that work in our environment. We have Citrix specialists, we have database specialists, we have a team of VMware specialists, and I'm just here to share some of our stuff with you guys. The first thing I want to bring to light, and I'm sure you all know this, virtualization is a solution. It's something that you truly have to treat like a solution and look at every different aspect of it, because the strengths of one part will help offset the weaknesses of another part. But if you keep everything well balanced, you'll have a much more consistent level of performance to your end users. And ultimately, that's what we want to do, is we want to make sure that they are getting their expected response times. We don't want to have a lot of resources that are just sitting idle, and we don't want to be undercapacitized where it's running too slow for them. So it's really a big balancing act. You have to look at the hardware of the host, the different components of the hardware in the host, whether it's the number of cores you have in your CPUs, the amount of RAM that you have, the type of RAM that you're using, the software, the version of ESX, the software within the guest, whether it's the VMware tools, whether it's the version of the platform, the patch revision. Everybody's solution is going to be slightly different. And the reason for that is one virtualization solution is going to have many different facets. You're going to have areas that are pockets that are specialized for databases or specialized for web servers or specialized for streaming servers, whether it's video or audio or what have you. So if you have an environment that's small enough that you're going to have to support everything, it's a little bit more difficult. When you get to the size where you can create these pockets that are customized, it gives you a little bit more flexibility in the fact that you can architect the environment to capitalize on the areas that the customer really needs. I'm going to share with you a little bit about what we have virtualized. We virtualized essentially all of our different types of applications. The only thing we haven't touched is Unix. So we've virtualized our web servers, whether it's IIS, Apache, our application servers, 2-tier, 3-tier, Citrix servers. We have a couple of different versions of our Citrix farm that has been virtualized, SQL servers, and auditing and reporting servers. We've pretty much run the gamut. The key to And this is something that's come out even in the sessions that I've attended while I'm here this year, is the key to virtualizing any application or having a successful virtual deployment is making sure that everything is configured properly, but configured based on the customer's use case for the application. I can't reiterate that enough. Everybody else throughout the conference has been putting the same theme throughout their presentations. So it's definitely something that we have to work closely with our application vendors when we can. I'll cover this quickly. Our initial deployment, we worked with a vendor where they gave us a specific set of requirements. All of the application servers needed to be encapsulated and were really very functionalized. So that worked for us very well. It made it very easy to virtualize. But what really made it a better virtualization scenario is they kind of fought us tooth and nail about virtualizing it. Because everything back in the 2006-2007 timeframe was still very physical. So we were able to work with them closely and really hound them for exact specifications of what is this component going to be doing, what aspect is it going to be using the most. Is it memory intensive, CPU intensive? So it worked in our favor, it worked out well, and that's what helped us launch our virtualization platform. The more challenging deployments we've had over the years, and I'll say they're challenging because they were still successful. We still virtualized them very successfully, and what we had to do is we really had to, some of the vendors we had to educate on virtualization, the difference between a core and a processor and a CPU, and in some cases we had to blur the lines. So, what you might say is, well, a CPU is equal to a core. It doesn't always work that way. It depends on how the application is written. Is it single-threaded, multi-threaded? How well is it multi-threaded? That's going to really dictate what type of virtual machine you're going to give to the application. So again, it boils down to understanding the application and the vendor understanding the application. That's the other thing that made it challenging. Some of these vendors, they really didn't understand virtualization, and some of the vendors didn't really understand their application. So you had to really look at it after the fact and use monitoring tools to find out where the application was bringing the utilization up. The other thing to keep in mind is when you're doing P2Vs, this is where we got caught with some of the scenarios where we had physical servers that were extremely lowly utilized, and like I said, we have several teams that work within our infrastructure. That's got its good things and its bad things. So some of the physical machines that we brought into the infrastructure during the initial conversion phase, it came over and you found that the way the application vendor back in the day had configured it wasn't really optimized for virtual, nor was it optimized for the platform. So that worked out to give you bad performance. Take the time before you do your P2Vs. Definitely quantify how the application is configured. Does it meet best practices for the application? Does it meet best practices for how you would deploy your regular Windows virtual machines or Linux virtual machines? Make sure that it allows enough space for things to be cached and whatnot, because minor configuration problems in the configuration will be bad settings can multiply and become bigger as they get virtualized. And this just kind of reiterates that a little bit. We've done better working with the vendors up front, looking at how things are, how the configuration is going in, making recommendations to the business unit prior to virtualizing the application. And when I say making recommendations prior to virtualizing it, it really has to do with more on the P2V side. Because if you're going to look to, so everybody says, well, the application was working great for the last 4 years in this configuration, we're going to move it over here, why do we need to change it? If you get enough pushback, you're not going to, sometimes it's just not worth arguing the point to say, well, we want to change it, we want to change it. Make the recommendation up front, put it into virtual, monitor it, and if you still see that you can, give them better utilization on the same configuration, say, this is what we recommended before, we see that we could still do that for you. Or if you run into a problem when you virtualize it, say, well, remember when we said this, with us it's boded better with the business unit or customer to do that. So reiterating what you had mentioned beforehand works better. Now I'm going to dig into some of the specifics of what will directly impact your performance, physical hardware considerations, the ESX software considerations, guest and application considerations, all these things that I've put together are not hardware specific. Some are not even ESX version specific. It's stuff that you find working with the infrastructure over the years. It's stuff that you find when you're doing your initial design planning. So I tried to keep it at a high level so that it's ideas that you can take back to the office and dig into it a little bit further. I put links to a couple of different documents in here so that you can get more detailed information. I didn't get into the nitty-gritty with any of this stuff because the subject matter experts are here. Those guys, you have Scott Drummond, you have Scott Lowe. These guys are the geniuses, and they know this stuff better than I ever will. But I'm putting it in front of you from a customer perspective, what I've seen that works, and where I've seen the biggest benefits. Hardware assist. This is something that you enable it in a BIOS. It's available on AMD, and it's called RVI in AMD, and in Intel, it's called Hardware Assist. This is something that is very beneficial with regards to extending your clusters so that you can do vMotion across them. It'll give you better performance with vMotion. It's also something that, as I found out this week, it impacts how the CPU scheduler works when it's scheduling multi-CPU virtual machines onto a CPU. This helps out tremendously in that. I didn't even know that it did that, but I did notice that when we were deploying it, when we started enabling Hardware Assist a couple of years ago, that the transition from host to host, when we were moving multiple machines around, and we were, to do upgrades and whatnot, it definitely made a difference. So it's something that you enable in the BIOS. There's only 2 settings that you have to enable on an Intel system. That's primarily what we use. And all you have to do is enable these 2 settings, reboot the host, and the virtualization platform, whether it's 3.0, 3.5, or 4.0, will automatically detect this capability and start leveraging it. EVC mode, not so dynamic. However, it does have a lot of advantages. EVC mode is a setting on your clusters that will enable a broader case compatibility of your vMotion within your clusters. It's very helpful. It's very good so initially when we did our first deployment, everything was brand spanking new. It was all going in on the same platform. Works great. Everything's good. As we started to expand the infrastructure and we started to reclaim physical systems, some of these systems really weren't that old, but we were saving, money, we were saving power, we were saving cooling, and we were winding up with a lot of extra cables in our data center. Started to reclaim some of this hardware, started to try to work it in, and you start to see, well, vMotion's not working. How do I get this stuff to be a little bit more diversified? We started to set up development environments where we were using the older hardware for the dev teams to do stuff. EVC mode will enable you to do that. It does take the cluster and it will run it at the lowest common denominator for the chipset that's on the microcode that's on the CPU to enable vMotion. So technically you should be taking some type of performance hit. I haven't really been able to quantify that, but it definitely has quantifiable differences when it comes to compatibility on older versions of hosts. I put a VMware link here. This is one of the documents that is very helpful to give you a further understanding to it and how you would enable it. Physical memory considerations. So the new memory architecture, the newer systems that are coming out on the Nehalem chipset. There's different speeds of memory that are available to the systems. Now, you can have the fastest speed memory, but depending on how you lay it out within the banks of the system, you may not be able to run it as fast. The fastest memory can run on the newer systems is 1333. We've been using 1066, all along, and we've had great performance. But if you want to have a higher performance cluster, if you have to have a SQL database running, or you want that extra performance, look at the new memory architecture. You can only use rank 1 to get the 1333 speed. However, depending on the hardware vendor, they do have some scenarios where you can go into not just the rank 1, but also rank 2 in the memory configuration. Now, the way they lay the memory out in the new memory architecture, the memory is attached directly to the CPU. So in a 2-socket server, you have to keep in mind that when you put in 32 gigs of RAM in there, you're actually going to be putting 16 gigs next to each processor, which is fine because most of us are probably not going to have 16 gig guests. But if you put in a quad-socket server, and so we ran into this scenario where we had put in a server that was a quad-socket server, and it had 64 gigs of RAM. So that's great, but the maximum size memory you can put on any one of those guests is only 16 gigs. And the reason for that is you've got 4 sockets in there, so you've got 16 gigs that went across to each socket. If you go beyond that 16 gig limit, what happens is it addresses the 16 gig on CPU 1, and then it has to get that other 4 gig from CPU 2. You take a performance hit on that. Is it tremendous? We didn't use it long enough in that configuration to know how tremendous it would be. The system hadn't gone into production yet, so I can't say exactly how much of a performance hit you'll take, but it's, your mileage will vary depending on how you lay out your memory. So what I'm saying is be cognizant of it. Every vendor does it a little bit differently. Take a close look at how you're buying your memory, and in some scenarios you can put all the memory just on the first 2 CPUs depending on the vendor. So you have to look at that closely when you're doing that. Wrapping up the hardware optimizations, just wanted to extend stuff that I've stuck with regards to the types of hardware that I'll use in our infrastructure. I prefer to stick with the name brand manufacturers that basically write the drivers for everything in the box, because they work very closely with VMware to do that. There's a lot of value add to that. The value add is probably not going to be so obvious when you first deploy the hardware and the software and get everything running. But when the chips are down and something's broke and you're trying to fix something, and it turns out that it's going to be, maybe it's a video driver, maybe it's not a video driver, maybe it's a NIC driver, or it's a SAN card driver, and it's giving you a lot of problems, it's much easier to work with the larger vendors, and they own the drivers for everything in the box. They can't really point to say, well, we don't think it's a SAN driver, we think it's a network driver. You have to go talk to Broadcom, or you have to go talk to somebody else. And they're trying to get you off the phone. So that's just been my personal experience. It's however you want to take that information. ESX configuration. There's a couple things that you can do as far as figuring out what versions you want to run with. Our environment has been ESX for several years, because ESXi was not nearly equivalent to ESX, didn't have all the capabilities. As of 4.0, they got all of those capabilities in there. We just recently started to adopt the ESXi platform this year to span our clusters within the virtual infrastructure. Our testing has shown that aside from it being a supported configuration, we haven't seen any nuances as far as when we're trying to do anything within the clusters. We do keep them separated by clusters. It's something that you should be looking very closely at. It's, the standard version of ESX is going away. You want to be able to manage it better. The third-party tools have pretty much all but abandoned putting any type of agents into the hosts. There's still a couple people that put agents in there, but I would highly recommend against it. The GUI tools that are coming out to manage the console list environment, whether it's Power GUI or Echo Shell, they're awesome. They work very well. We have a very limited ESXi infrastructure, so I can't really comment exactly how much better or whatever what those tools are, but they're there and they give you the same capabilities. Some of the host configuration optimizations. One of the things that we did was we expanded our service console to 800 megs. Initially we did this to have the ability to put agents in there. Having agents within the service console is a bad idea. We learned that early on. So, but having the service console larger at 800 megabytes bodes well if you have to open up the log files and you have to a large log file and you need to grep for stuff. The response time is much better when you have a larger service console. The other thing it does is it does also help with vMotion calculations. If you run into a scenario where you're putting multiple hosts into maintenance mode at the same time, whether it's to do patches or updates, it does help speed up the vMotion time to evacuate your hosts. Something to keep in mind, when you, if you expand the memory setting, you need to expand the swap file partition. This is something that you need to make sure is set to 16. If you go to 800, you have to go to 1600. But whatever value you decide to use, you want to make sure it's 2 times the size. Now, 800 is the maximum you can use. There's really no penalty to going to 800 megabytes, only other than it's 800 megabytes less that you'll be able to give to your guests. But based on the amount of memory that everybody's probably putting in their hosts, 800 megabytes isn't really the end of the world. So that's what we've used. With regards to data stores, it's not really an ESX host configuration setting, but it's something that's definitely, you need to remain cognizant of it. We've limited our data stores for most of our production guests to around 500 gigs. We have some that are larger when we have a guest that is going to take up a large portion of the data store. A lot of our guests, I don't know, how many guys have a lot of their virtual machines are under 50 gigs? Show of hands. A lot of you. Good. Well, so good. Good to see I'm not alone. So by having a lot of guests on a data store, you have a lot of different I/O curves. Really wrapping your head around the I/O curves, can be difficult. It's not that it's difficult; it's just time consuming. They've come out with a lot more tools as of late to see where, to take a look at what the I/O curves are on each of your data stores. We have a lot of data stores. I mean, if I only had 5, it would be very, very easy to do it. You could do it from the service console and whatnot, and you could get a good idea. But, as you get to, hundreds of data stores, it's, that becomes tedious, and keeping track of what the I/O curves are and new stuff that comes in and whatnot. So limiting those sizes, you're not really, if you're following some best practices, 20% free on your data store, whether it's 20% of 500 or it's 20% of 1 terabyte or 20% of 2 terabytes. It's the same 20%. So you're not really losing the amount of space. But it does help you break up your I/O curves. So that's the one thing I wanted to bring out there. Something that, that's another great document to get a handle on the storage workload. It works with, I believe it works with the vSCSI. I think that was with the vSCSI stats. Shares. So this is the way we use shares in our environment. Is everybody's going to use their environment differently. Everybody's going to customize how they do stuff. So our environment is geared towards high performance, consistent performance, redundancy, and reliability. So we're not trying to squeeze out necessarily every single ounce out of our hosts. We do squeeze out a lot out of our hosts, and we get consolidation ratios depending on the application, anywhere from 10 to 1 to 50 to 1. But at the same time, one of the big things that we keep in mind is the recoverability time. So if you lose multiple hosts in a particular system, you want to know that it's going to come up in a timely fashion. If all of your hosts are fully loaded and up to 50 to 1, and you've got reservations and shares and everything else, if you experience any type of major failure, your results will vary. Giving the virtual infrastructure the ability to be more flexible by only using shares where applicable. Shares is really what's going to come into play when you are performance constrained. So, when you have high visibility applications, or you have applications that have a lot of users on it, so that if you lost 15 virtual machines, if that amongst all the other guests, if that one becomes most visible first, make sure it has a higher share value so that it comes up. So that's the first one to come up. The other way to control that is also with restart priorities. If your environment is properly loaded, shares don't really do anything for you. They're not going to change the way an application runs if everything is properly loaded across the environment. And that's kind of where we've taken the mindset. Now, I've been in sessions this week. I've been in them in past years where you can use reservations and you can use shares and you can make your environment very complex. The more complex you make it in that fashion, the harder it is for it to be flexible, for you to move stuff between clusters, for you to move, take stuff down and do all of that. So that reservations, shares, I tread lightly with them. But again, there's different schools of thought depending on your business use. Your business use may dictate that you need to get the maximum amount, and you can use reservations and shares, and if you have a static environment and you know exactly what the performance curve is, you can absolutely bring that to a higher consolidation ratio. But at the same time, you sacrifice flexibility when you do that. So it's based on your business use. And this is reservations. I wanted to dedicate a slide to this. We used reservations a lot in the beginning. As we started to ramp up and to do more and more virtualization, reservations became, it becomes a deployment limiting factor in that sometimes you could, if you assign your reservations too large, like I said, we have multiple teams that have their hands into our infrastructure, and having a solid understanding of reservations and shares and everything, and keeping that information current with all the people that are working in your infrastructure can be more effort than it's worth. We use reservations. We're very applicable. We have some applications that are very sensitive to performance, and we do use reservations. However, we use them sparingly. Guest optimization. There's a lot of things that you can do within your guest to enable better performance or more consistent performance. Some of them require testing, some don't. The things that require testing is stuff that will probably give you the best impact to your virtual infrastructure as well as to your guests' performance. So you should definitely take some of these things and try them out when you get back to the office. When you're deploying new stuff, when you're doing P2Vs, these are things that you should look to enable that may not have been enabled in the past. Large page support within your guests. This is one of those things. PAE extensions in Windows is something that's not enabled by default. It's something that can give you give you better performance in the guest, better memory sharing within your virtual infrastructure. Again, you combine this with the better memory sharing, with the faster memory. All these little things, they start to add up to end user performance. So, it's one of the things that I try to bring out is that virtualization is a solution, and you have to look at all the different facets of it. Because if you architect it at each level and on each facet of your virtual infrastructure, overall it can have a big impact to your infrastructure. And I put a link in here to one of VMware's better documents on large page support. Swap file location. I'll buzz through this relatively quickly. This is basic Windows stuff that you should do. A lot of people have forgotten about it. The page file, when the systems were overcapacitized, putting the page file on the same drive as the root file system, not a big deal because the performance hit that you would take wouldn't really be noticed. It would be absorbed by the CPU. However, when you're looking at smoothing everything out across your virtual infrastructure and getting an even keel of performance, that's what's going to give you a better consolidation ratio and better transition when this stuff moves around from host to host. This can make a difference. So put your swap file in a separate partition. If you're concerned that, okay, so I don't have one on my root partition, now I can't get the logs from the C drive if I have a blue screen, put one on the C drive. Windows is actually intelligent enough to know that, okay, so I've got two page files. Which one of these volumes actually has a lot of activity? Well, if your second volume only has the page file, that's the only activity it's got. So it's only going to use that page file. It'll only use the one on the root partition when you have a blue screen. And then you've got the logs to submit to Microsoft. So should they be able to help you with that? So I also put a link in here to Microsoft memory recommendations as far as, how it's, a little bit further insight into it. One of the things to keep in mind with this is your mileage will vary. Not it may vary, it will vary. You need to take the time to look at your application. How is it using its memory? Is it using all the memory that you gave to it? If it is using it, is it overusing it? You know, make sure that you've got all this. You take a look at this stuff after it's gone into production, maybe 30 days after it's gone in there, because you know we all know that when you first put something out there, most people don't log into it the first day or two. Guest layout in your clusters. This is something that we've been working with a lot over the course of the last year or so as we roll out larger patches and patches to our infrastructure. There can be some significant gains by, by grouping all of your, not just your Windows hosts together, but Windows Service Pack 1, Windows Service Pack 2, different patch revisions, different web server types, putting them together. You will get better memory sharing within all of your, across an ESX host. Now, does that mean you need to dedicate a cluster to it? No. And, you know, depending on your environment. So our environment is relatively static. Our DRS kicks into play when a lot of times when we're going to put stuff into maintenance mode. It does some minor tweaks throughout the day and throughout the week, depending on performance loads. But for the most part, it doesn't change too much. So this is something that we do have to do manually. I haven't found a great way to do it with a DRS rule. One of the guys came up to me the other day and asked me, well, is there something I can set in DRS? I'm not aware of any way to set a DRS rule to group your web servers or your SQL servers together. But you can run reports with the different tools to see which servers are running SQL, which ones are running Apache Web Server or IIS. And then you can manually put them into a collection of hosts. So something to keep in mind. Two products that we've used. And so if you noticed in the beginning of the session, I didn't have that little disclaimer slide about legal, this, that, and the other thing. So they actually let me speak about a couple of third-party products, which I thought was pretty cool, because I was pretty sure when I was putting this together a couple months ago that they weren't going to let me speak about third-party products. We do use Foglight. We use Embotics. These two products are very good at what they do. I would highly recommend that you stop by the Solutions Exchange, check them out. They both can be tailored and customized for whatever you need to do. You know, we use them for, you know, Embotics we use for auditing, reporting. It creates awesome management reports. It schedules the reports so that we don't even have to worry about sending them to management, so I can't forget to send them something on a Friday afternoon. It automatically goes to them, and I don't have to worry about it. Of course, they ask me questions about it on Monday. I have to go digging through my email to find my copy of the report, but it's at least the report is out there, and I'm not getting pinged for it at the end of the week. We use Foglight for real-time monitoring. We use Foglight for monitoring, not real-time monitoring, and I'll dig into that a little bit on the next one of the further slides. But Foglight, it not only reports on all the stuff that's in Virtual Center. Virtual Center, it reports on, I think it's a little over half of all the things of all the information that it captures from the hosts. Whereas Foglight basically captures all the stuff in addition to that and makes it available to you in the GUI tool. Now, that's a tremendous amount of different counters and additional counters that it looks at, but it doesn't bring all those to the forefront. So when you use these tools, you have to keep in mind it requires some time to look into them and configuration and setup. You will get a lot of information out of it, but the only way to get more information out of it than what you would get in Virtual Center is to really spend some time working on them. Guest optimizations. We've pretty much not used limits because we made a conscious decision that we're designed more along redundancy and high availability versus, like I said, getting them every ounce out of our hosts. We like to have a little bit of extra headroom on each one of our hosts so that we can easily fail over within our infrastructure. But limits, so I've seen some machines that have gone into our infrastructure that have limits, and the reason I've seen them is because I've seen we've gotten calls that they're not performing well, and the application support guys don't know why. The limits was the reason why, because they can't see the limits. We only give our application support guys access to see what's going on within the guest. A machine goes in with limits and they can't see it, so yeah, it says they have 2 gigs of RAM, but we're only allowing them to use 1 gig. And that can be accidental. So sometimes when you build a machine from a template, it will take what the settings are in the template and it will put that as a limit, even though you've changed the memory setting. So check around for limits. This is something that we don't use, and it's something that can trip you up and cause a little performance issues. VMware tools. This is, it's very important, and everybody knows it's important to have VMware tools up and running. It helps with ballooning. It helps with performance. It helps with vMotion and that whatnot. One other thing to keep in mind is that it does also look to sync time with the ESX host. We purposely don't sync it with the hosts, and this is due to the fact that if the host were to get out of time sync, we don't want that to impact all of the guests that are running on that host. Because if you have 25 servers on there that are Windows guests, for argument's sake, and they get out of time sync, all of a sudden you've got 25 applications and users can't log in, and we'd rather it, and it's also best practices. So I put a link in here for VMware to you can get a little bit further information and justification on their pointers on that. But that's something that we set in our systems. Guest memory settings. Only give it the amount of memory that it's actually going to use. I highly encourage you guys to audit your environment, see how much you put it in there with. If you put it in there with 2 gigs, audit it 60 to 90 days later. That's one of the other things that we use Foglight for. Is so we'll audit something 60 to 90 days later, and then we'll see what the trending was. Because great, I look at it 3 times this week, and it's only using 1 gig of RAM, or it's only using 256 meg. We had a server that was only using 384, and we had allocated 4 gigs of RAM. And every time we looked at it, it wasn't using anything. Well, that's because it was a batch SQL server that ran batches overnight. So you have to look at the full spectrum, audit it. Make sure that you take a look at what it does throughout the life cycle of the application. Again, talk to the business unit. Maybe they only use it at the end of the quarter. So you want to make sure that you're not looking at it during the beginning of the quarter when nobody logs in. NUMA-enabled processors. I talked about that a little bit earlier. This is a link to the doc. This is an extremely good doc. So one of the other things I'll mention to you guys is one of the reasons why I'm up here talking about what we've done is I wanted to share with you guys what we've done that's actually worked for us. These are things that I've done that have worked. I've gotten a lot of good information from the communities. This is a little bit giving back, but the VMware communities gives you a lot of information. It's very helpful. Kid Colbert session, that was yesterday. But there's another session after this. Karshik is giving it on performance management. Great guys. They give you a lot of detailed information on that stuff. I'll move on because this was really just to encourage you to audit how much memory is in use and how much you allocated to it in the beginning. Because from an overhead perspective, if you over-allocate your memory on all of your virtual machines, there's a lot of sharing that goes on, but you'll lose overhead on the host because you've allocated too much memory to it. There's a couple of things. This is really a basic slide, but it's some things that I just wanted to make sure everybody was aware of. There's 3 major settings that will increase your performance when your application support or your virtual admins are logging into the guest, whether it's through remote desktop or whether it's through the console session. Set the video adapter display to hardware acceleration. Don't configure a screensaver. And disable the mouse pointer shadow. The mouse pointer shadow and the full hardware acceleration make a huge difference. The screensaver, it makes a difference in your overall infrastructure, keeping the utilization down and keeping it consistent. But the first one and the last one will definitely make a big difference for you guys when you're logging into the system. I listed here a couple of the tools: PowerShell, RCLI, VCLI, workload tests on the storage. Again, 103. I mentioned the troubleshooting guide. These are, some of these documents are large. I have an hour to speak in this session, and I know I'm not going to use up the whole hour, which will work out good because everybody's got to run from one session to get to the other session early. So it kind of works out for everybody to get to the other sessions. But there's a lot of things. These are just high-level things to keep in mind when you're doing your stuff. It takes a lot more than an hour to architect a system for performance. It really takes a lot of time of looking at what the application does, what the system needs to be able to do, when it's going to be most active, so that you can pair up your busy daytime apps with your busy nighttime apps, so that you can get the most out of your hosts. So just wanted to touch on that, and that's the. I'm going to open up the floor to questions. If anybody has any questions, feel free to come up to the microphone, come up to the front, and I'll answer anything that you have. Sure.